What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we're gonna be talking about Marauders number 6 by Steve Orlando and Andrea Briccardo. And in this video, I'm gonna be breaking down how each of the Marauders has been judged in this a.x.e. Judgment Day Marvel Comics crossover event, as well as breaking down the identity of the Judas that's been hounding the Marauders since Steve Orlando took over the series.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Alright, so let's get into it. Each of the Marauders has been judged in this issue, and while the comic itself doesn't expressly spell out how each and every solitary member of the Marauders is judged this issue, we get lots of hints as to what that judgment might have been just the same, and it's left largely up to our own interpretations of how they responded to these judgments to give us a little bit of insight. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think each of these characters has been judged the way they have been. And I like how they do this because one of the things that comes up this issue, and this is actually something that's come up over the course of other issues in the X-Men line of comics. This has come up in the Sabretooth series. It's come up in Legion of X. I believe it's also come up in the Immortal X-Men series as well. But we do know that the character Birdie, who used to be Sabretooth's ally, a mutant whose sole purpose was to make sure that Sabretooth never lost control. This character, as we know, has been resurrected. She's been mentioned off and on here and there as being resurrected. So yeah, it was one of those things like, cool, this is awesome. She's back now. We actually get to see her in action. And what she's doing in this issue is that we learn she's been working with the character Aurora. She's been helping her with her own mental health, and it's something that's kind of just been relegated to just the two of them. But in the wake of everything that's happened with the first blood spilled and all the Shi'ar stuff, Aurora felt that maybe if they somehow combined Birdie's powers with new Marauders character Somnus's powers, they could create a mutant circuit with one another that could basically help them get months worth of psychiatric help in the span of 10 minutes. And what they do is they actually do spend 10 minutes working out what is easily 10 months worth of psychology. What Birdie refers to as hyperbolic time therapy, using Somnus's ability to put people in a dream state, and time becomes more malleable where Somnus can literally stretch 10 minutes and make it feel like 10 months, and Birdie can work her telepathic abilities to help people cope with what's going on in their head. And one of the first subjects I want to bring up is the character of Bishop. When Bishop is judged by the Progenitor, he's not met with one person, but two people. He's met by Malcolm and Randall, two of his best buds in the XSE in his original timeline. They chastise him for not resurrecting them in the present day, something that is technically possible considering it has been mused people can be resurrected from memory. It's just tricky because there's a lot of room for error. This was something that came up in regards to Lord Chantel. During Jerry Duggan's Marauders, Lords is a character who was long thought dead before Xavier began backing mutants up using Cerebro, though she was in fact actually alive the entire time. She was just in hiding from Sebastian Shaw. But that's not why Bishop didn't have them revived. He felt that the world in its current state wasn't good enough to have them in it, not the other way around, as the apparitions of Malcolm and Randall would try and convince him was the case. Bishop doesn't feel that he's a perfect person, and he doesn't feel this world is perfect enough to have them in it. It's not that he doesn't want them back, it's just that when he brings them back, he wants them to come to a world that is better than the one they lived in. Now, granted, the future they came from is, I would say, objectively terrible compared to the one they currently live in. But this era, this reality that Bishop lives in now, is not perfect either. It is far from it. And while it's not the hellish dystopia apocalypse that he came from, it's not that far from becoming it. And I think that would actually be a fate worse than death, to take them from a world where they already knew such terrible hardship and take them to one where that hardship isn't currently happening, but ain't that far from it either. I think that would actually be the worst of things for Bishop to actually do. And this is seen as inaction, which leads me to believe Bishop has been tried and found with a thumbs down. And I say that because the words he uses waiting. He uses the words waiting to do the right thing. And we know how the progenitor feels about waiting. We saw this in a.x.e. Death to the Mutants #2 in regards to the human Sally, the character that was depicted as procrastinating on achieving something that she was passionate about. She was judged for that, and that alone, negatively. I'm pretty sure Bishop has been judged the same way. Next up is the character Aurora. Aurora was snatched into a session similar to the ones that she had normally been having with Birdie solo dolo to discuss the topic of her mental health and her past struggles with dissociative identity disorder, something that really hasn't come up very often, maybe even only once in X Factor number 10 since her return in House of X, but she's trapped in a scenario where she's being judged by a villainous character that she had tangled with in the past in her old Alpha Flight days, the character Headlock. But not before Aurora blasts him into oblivion. She receives a single card, the Hanged Man. Likely, this is a thumbs down. Now, to explain what's going on here, what she received isn't necessarily a tarot card. They're referred to what is called interactive cards. They're basically cards that are meant to signify an emotion. They're used largely in therapy. In this specific card, just based on the nature of it, a hanged man with a devil underneath him is signifying Aurora's guilt over the murder that she committed during the events of X Factor number 10, where she killed a normal human and covered it all up by making it appear that the human had actually murdered her and then killed himself. Not only that, but Daken has been drugged into this as well because he killed that particular human's friends who may have come looking for him, and they're keeping each other's secrets. This is all very likely tied to the amount of guilt that she feels over this and the fact that she's keeping this a secret from everyone, knowing what it could mean to her future if any of this was ever found out. Not only would she be condemned to exile, but so too would Daken. So as far as I'm concerned, I feel this is very much a thumbs down for Aurora. Next up is the character Tempo. Tempo was judged by her former Mutant Liberation Front teammate, Sumo, or as the name she reveals that Sumo preferred, his human one of Jun Tenta. And she's been criticized by the progenitor for not saving Tenta, something that is a bit of a retcon considering her powers to change time and rewind or fast forward things. This is all in regards to stopping the Marvel villain team, the Eugenics, who've never been in a comic with the Mutant Liberation Front before, but that's because it never actually happened. Tempo changed events so that they could stop the Eugenics and save not just the MLF, but X-Force as well, making Tenta a hero. This basically negated their entire encounter with one another, which is sad because when Cable next met the MLF in Cable Blood and Metal #1 in 1992, he unceremoniously shot Tenta in the head, and Tenta has been dead ever since. Now the real question is, could Tempo have stopped time or reversed time and undone this? Well, that would have been tricky because technically when this occurred, Tempo wasn't around for this particular melee with Cable. Now, could she have done something when she discovered what happened? At that particular point in time, her powers weren't really up to the point that they are now, where she could reverse something that had happened after the fact if she wasn't right there to do it on the spot. So honestly, I don't think she should be judged negatively for this. However, maybe she could have, and we just don't know that. But regardless of that, I think the real question is, why hasn't she said something? Why has she done anything or made any efforts to get Tenta resurrected? And why is she only thinking about it now because the progenitor has brought it up? This is why she likely got a thumbs down as well, though she does say that she is actually going to take the efforts to, once all this is over, get Tenta resurrected and try and explain everything that happened to him and tell him what the truth of the matter really was, how their actions actually led to him dying as opposed to the rest of the team dying, because that was kind of the rub here, is that their encounter with Eugenics led to the MLF getting utterly wiped out with the exception of Tempo and Tenta. And Tempo going back and changing things got Tenta killed just the same, even if it was days later. And Tempo has carried that guilt with her, and that's very likely why the progenitor is judging her harshly. I think it's because, not because necessarily what she did or what she didn't do, but how she's choosing to weigh that guilt against her. The fact that she's taking this burden upon herself and rendering herself guilty as opposed to just letting things go. Next up is the character Psylocke, and Psylocke had a very interesting encounter with the progenitor, being confronted not by anyone who'd evoke a feeling of sadness in her, but one who'd evoke a feeling of anger. Sinister is the one who judges her, but it would eventually be the vision of her child that was taken from her that sealed the deal. The progenitor pushed every button that he could, pointing to her life as an assassin, a murderer for hire, never having any agency over herself up until recently, and all the other villainous things that she's ever done over the years, and most of all, the giving up of her child. But it turns out that Psylocke's righteous indignation at the progenitor's claims and her proclamation that she will come to the Arctic Circle and battle him until she can fight no longer, this actually got the progenitor's approval. Now, they don't really say whether this is a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but I do feel like this is, in fact, a thumbs up. I feel like the progenitor weighed all this, seeing all the things that had happened to Kwannon over the years, and also noting she hasn't had a lot of agency over herself over the years up until recently, and that she's actually done more with the little bit of time that she's been in control of herself, probably more than she's ever done in her entire life. She has actually been making concerted efforts to get her child back, even going as far as to lowering herself by working with Mr. Sinister during the events of Fallen Angels, as well as the events of Hellions. And that she's been covering for Sinister a lot of the times too, just to try and get her child back. And the only reason that her efforts haven't yielded fruit, that she hasn't gotten her child back, is because the only backup of her child that Sinister had was destroyed by Havoc during the course of that Hellion series. So it's not her fault she doesn't have that child back with her in her arms again. It's somebody else's. And I think the progenitor took notice of that, and the fact that she is angry about it and that she still is trying to find a way to get that child back. I think that factored a lot into the progenitor's judgment. Something I've noticed is that the progenitor, when faced down by the people that he's judging, the people that don't shy away from him, who don't run away from him, who aren't afraid of him, the people who stand up to him do tend to get favorable judgment. So maybe that is a running theme. Maybe if the mutants start actually standing up to the progenitor, they might just start seeing more favorable judgments. Next up is going to be the character of Somnus. Somnus is a little more nebulous. He's being judged by his childhood hero, Northstar. Complete with his 90s era Alpha Flight suit, fresh off of coming out as gay back in Alpha Flight number 106 in 1992. He's being judged for not coming out, or at the very least, staying in the closet for as long as he had, being a homosexual man and never really truly accepting it. Yeah, sure, he lived his life as homosexual to himself, but he hid it from his family for so long. He always hid in shame of who and what he was. And not just even as a homosexual, but also as a mutant. This one, I feel, is honestly a little weird for me because personally, I feel it's not something to judge someone by. There are plenty of people in this world, and I'm not talking fictional, I'm talking real world people who don't come out as homosexual or lesbian or bisexual, pansexual, transgender, whatever, until late in life. And a lot of the reason behind this is because, well, a lot of times they don't know. Sometimes they do know, but they didn't really know. Like, it's one of those things that was always in the back of their heads, but it just never really came to the forefront until they were older in life. And there were some people who have always known, but hid this because they felt some sort of personal shame or felt they would be shamed by the people they care about. So this is one of those areas where I kind of feel like, I don't know if I can jive with this. But the reason why I am going to just kind of let it go, and I feel most other people should too, is because, for one, this is a fictional character, and while yes, these stories do tend to have impacts on people who come from, such communities that are being talked about in this issue, I feel like if anyone was going to talk about it, I feel like Steve Orlando, a man who is openly bisexual, I feel as though if anyone were going to talk about it, he'd be one of the better people to talk about it. Now, as to whether or not he got a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that one's a little bit more hard to say because he does actually stand up to the progenitor and kind of implies he never actually heard the progenitor's judgment. He does specifically say that he was asked why he deserved life. He doesn't say anything about getting an answer. But based on what he says after the fact, I'm getting the impression maybe the progenitor might have judged him with a thumbs up. He just didn't get a chance to hear the progenitor's words. Next up is going to be the character of Daken, who might be the weirdest one yet, because Daken wasn't judged by another person. Dakin was judged by himself, and not a projection of himself either. It was basically him talking to himself, and literally just himself by himself, and the progenitor was just in his head and speaking as him when the progenitor chose to speak. Dakin is being judged for being an animal, nothing more than a beast, but he reveals a lot to himself in this conversation. One of the things I think is actually the most important calls back to the previous issue where we talked about him getting a new name. I wasn't 100% sure whether he'd actually go with this or not, but it turns out he actually did. He is choosing to go by the name Fang now, as opposed to just Dakin or Akihiro, even though Akihiro is actually his birth name. Dakin was a name that was just given to him. This is the name he feels that he earned, so he actually is taking up not just the look of Fang from the Shi'ar Super Guardians, but also taking up the name himself. He is wearing the Fang costume in this issue, and once again, referring to himself as Fang. I thought that was very telling. But one of the things he talks about is that for now, even though he's a weapon, he's always been used as a weapon and treated as nothing more than a killing machine. He's choosing to no longer just be a mindless killing machine for other people, and that while he will remain a killer forever, he will be a killer for himself and for the people he cares about and no one else. Now that said, the newly christened Fang, he seems to be of the belief that he was given a thumbs down. I don't think that's the case. I think he actually got a thumbs up. Because even though he has been treated as a weapon, has been used as a weapon, a lot of that's not entirely his fault. And as of late, he's actually had a lot of growth as a character, and I can admit this, being someone who's never been a fan of him as a character. I've never cared for Dakin up until recently. But he's made a lot of changes. He's tried to grow and become a better person, and a lot of that was due to some of the great writing that Leah Williams did with this character in X Factor and what Steve Orlando is carrying over into this new Marauders series. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he actually got a thumbs up here. Now, I saved Cassandra Nova and Kate Pryde for last because their judgments were never shown, only mentioned. While both seem to have gotten a judgment of a thumbs down based on Nova's earlier statement about coping with the judgment, with Nova wanting to emasculate Bourne followers with a glance, referring to Fabian Cortez and his forever hard-on for characters like Magneto. She also refers to Pryde choosing to punish herself by being in Cortez's presence for her judgment. The reasonings behind their judgment are easy enough to suss out. Nova is a terrible person who only lives for her own pleasure and enjoyment, as well as the destruction of others, and she is responsible for one of the greatest massacres of mutants in all of recorded Marvel Comics history, having been responsible for the Genoshan massacre that slew over 16 million mutants. So I wouldn't be surprised if she got a thumbs down, even though she is technically trying to turn over a new leaf. It kind of seems like, I won't say too little too late, but I do feel like she's still a very self-serving person, which is what's actually going to get her the thumbs down. Now, as for Kate Pryde, we actually learn, not in this issue, but in Immortal X-Men number 6, she actually got a thumbs up. But she doesn't know why. She has no clue. She doesn't have any knowledge of anything she's ever done in life that would give her a favorable judgment, even though she has technically done some amazing things, like in Astonishing X-Men, where she literally phased an entire giant bullet through the earth, not just once, but she also did it yet again during the Hunt for Wolverine story arc, where she phased the entire planet so that a bunch of smaller metal bullets, as they tried to shoot through the earth itself, phased through it and saved literally everyone on the planet Earth. Not only that, but she has been, I would dare say, one of the most consistent Marvel Comics characters in terms to morality than most others. Not saying that she's a saint or anything, but she has, for the most part, always stood by her beliefs in some way, shape, form, or fashion. She rarely ever wavers in what it is she believes in, and I think this is why she was judged favorably. Now, as to why she was punishing herself, I think Kate feels guilty about the judgment because she doesn't understand why she got the favorable judgment, hence why she's punishing herself. But no, the punishment isn't because she got a bad vote. That said, that's everyone on the team's judgments talked about, so the last thing I wanted to discuss is the reveal of the Judas who has been haunting the Marauders since Steve Orlando took over his writing duties on the series, and we learn who it is, and I thought maybe it might be a new character or someone who we just haven't thought about in a long time that has been really close to everything going on, but we just didn't see the forest for all the trees. It's actually not the case. Well, technically, one part of that is the idea that it's someone we haven't thought about, and it's someone I've never even considered. A character who really hasn't appeared in very many comics across his publication history, considering how long he's been around in the Marvel Comics universe, but the Judas actually happens to be a Judas, literally. The character Judas Traveler, a guy who first appeared in Web of Spider-Man number 117 in 1994. He's a mutant with telepathic abilities, though rather than using them to read minds, he's mostly using them to create illusions and projections, oftentimes making himself appear to be more powerful than his opponents than he truly is. Almost like a mutant version of Mysterio, or if we're just sticking to mutants, I would list him as maybe a store brand version of Mastermind. He's one of the last petals of Orchis that we have seen revealed, as he seems to hint, and now that he's the second known mutant working alongside Orchis, the other being Abigail Brand, he's likely the one handling the culture and narrative department of Orchis, since he makes a direct reference to catching the mutants attacking the Progenitor in Judgment Day number 3 on film and showing it to the world to frame them for potentially condemning the entire planet to annihilation. Now, once again, Judas is a very interesting character because I feel like he's actually going after the mutants in a way that we have technically seen Orchis attempt, but we're actually seeing who is actually pulling the strings in that department, because he doesn't just bring up the attack that the mutants about to do on the Progenitor, he also brings up Thunderbird's assault on the police department in Giant Size X-Men Thunderbird number 1. He also brings up the events of what happened with Nature Girl in the X-Men Unlimited series, which was a digital first series, and one I'm actually thinking about going back and covering. I've read it, but I've never really talked about it on the channel before because it just, I don't know. I didn't know if it was really gonna add up to anything, and apparently it is, because Nature Girl's actually been mentioned, I would dare say, at least twice over the course of the last couple of weeks of X-Men comics, both here in Marauders and I believe also in Legion of X. But anyways, there's lots of other little cool stuff going on here. We also do see a nod, a tease to Brimstone Love in the Theater of Pain at the very beginning of the issue. This has kind of been a running theme for the Marauder series. We keep seeing little one-page teases of things that's going on, and we know that Lockheed is very likely just being caught by the Theater of Pain and Brimstone Love, or at least he's on the verge of being caught by them, because he has been spying on them since Steve Orlando took over the book, so it's hard to say where that's going to go from here. But Steve Orlando was spinning a lot of plates with his book, and as you'll probably hear me talk about with a.x.e. Judgment Day Deaths to the Mutants number 1 and 2, that I love tie-in books that actually have something to do with the main plot of what's going on, not just something where, oh, this is just something that happened to be going on alongside all this other stuff, even though it doesn't really have anything to do with what's going on with this main crossover. This is one of those tie-ins. I'm like, yes, this is what a tie-in book should be. It should not just be mindless drivel. It should not just be slapping the name of the crossover on another book to entice you to buy something you probably wouldn't have bought anyway. So I appreciate that here they're actually, with Judgment Day, for the most part, with the exception of maybe like 1 or 2 books, everything has pretty much been on message. But that said, in the meantime, if you have not been keeping up with a.x.e. Judgment Day and you want to know more, check out this playlist up here. And if you want to know more about the character Tempo and what she's capable of, check out this video down here. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Marauders number 6. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.